Today, we are thrilled to have our speaker, Fred Leavitt. His topic is, if ignorance is bliss, we should all be ecstatic. And I know I'm ecstatic. That's because Fred's here. It's based on his latest book of the same name. Fred is a professor emeritus of comparative psychology, research methodology, and psychopharmacology, and has written over a dozen books. And welcome our speaker, Fred Leavitt, who will be talking on his new book, If Ignorance is Bliss, We Should All Be Ecstatic. Fred subscribes to the philosophy of radical skepticism, that true knowledge is impossible. And as such, he follows in the footsteps of Hume, Montaigne, and even Plato. As Fred and I were chatting before you guys joined us, and again, his topic is, if ignorance is bliss, we should all be ecstatic. So we give an ecstatic welcome to our speaker, Fred Leavitt. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Roberta. Thanks for the nice introduction. And I guess I'll start. Okay, I start with Socrates. He had a friend visit the Delphic oracle, and the oracle told the friend that Socrates was the wisest man in Athens. And Socrates had his doubts. So he went around interviewing supposed wise men, and he concluded that they thought they knew a lot, but they didn't really know anything. Or Socrates found out that he was the wisest man alive because he knew nothing and he knew that he knew nothing. And my goal today is to make all of you as wise as Socrates. You'll see you know nothing. And I have on the PowerPoint an ancient paradox. The only thing that's certain is that nothing is certain. Now, probably all of you are skeptics to a great extent. We're all exposed to advertising of all kinds, and we know we have to be skeptical. But that's a lot different from radical skepticism, which says we can't know anything. And that's what I'm talking about today. And there are paradoxes in all of this. One of them is that I'm going to try to convince you through reason, but I show later on that reason can't be trusted. Okay, there are certain assumptions that everybody makes. We can trust our senses, we can trust our reasoning abilities. There are laws of nature that we can learn, and that the future will resemble the past. Okay, now before I get to the assumptions, I can give you the very common sense view. The philosopher G.E. Moore said that even if an argument seems sound, if it leads to a bizarre conclusion, then it probably isn't sound. So consider the argument, my hands and body don't really exist. Well, of course they exist. It's obvious to us that they exist. It's more obvious than any of the premises of radical skepticism. So I accept that my hands and body exist, reject the argument for radical skepticism. But it turns out one reason not to trust Moore's argument, excuse me, is that many people who have had a limb amputated have sensations in the amputated limb. They feel as though it's really there. And that greatly weakens Moore's argument, I think. Well, I have to point out that I'm not completely crazy. So I developed a hypothetical experiment. Let's imagine that we have an infallible lie detector. And we ask a bunch of subjects, please tell the truth. And the lie detector shows they're telling the truth. Now please tell a lie. And the lie detector shows that they're lying. And now I come on and they ask me, do you expect things to happen in the natural way? If you're scheduled to give a talk, do you think it will really happen? When you bite into an apple, will it really taste the way you think it will? And I answer yes to all of those questions. And the lie detector shows that I'm telling the truth. And then they ask me, do you believe in your arguments for radical skepticism, that we can know absolutely nothing? And again, I'd say yes. And again, the lie detector would show that I'm telling the truth. So that's cognitive dissonance at the highest level. Let me give you a little bit of background. I got my doctorate in psychopharmacology, and I was convinced that in my lifetime, drugs would be made available that would treat virtually every human illness. They would improve creativity. They do all kinds of good things. That's what my instructors said at the University of Michigan Medical School and Pharmacology School. So I started teaching psychopharmacology, and I found that a lot of the studies that I had thought were wonderful were fraudulent. There were lies, there were cover-ups, there was dishonest scientific research. When a drug was tested compared to a sponsor's drug, 98% of the studies favored the sponsoring organization's drug. John Ioannidis is an eminent physician researcher who concluded, and I think this is incredible, that most of the conclusions in the major medical journals are incorrect. Medical reversals occur when it turns out that current medical practice does more harm than good. Physicians have been convinced to use a certain method. It turns out to be incorrect. Well, in the last 15 years, there have been 396 medical reversals in the major medical journals. So I wrote a book about that called The Real Drug Abusers. And one reviewer said it was the most important drug book of the last decade, strongly criticized drug companies. So then I began looking at other fields, and the other fields were equally bad. So I said, we can't know anything. I'll go back on that a little bit. There are three types of legitimate beliefs. One is that I know nothing. Second, Descartes' famous cogito ergo sum, I know that I exist. And third, I know when I experience certain body sensations. I know when I have a headache. So those are three kinds of things we can know. But if that's all you know, you're not going to get on the TV program Jeopardy. The one I'm on now says René Descartes is sitting in a bar having a drink. The bartender asks him if he would like another drink. He says, I think not, and he immediately vanishes. How do we ever learn anything? How do we get what we think is knowledge? Well, I already talked about one thing, bodily states. Another is innate knowledge. Another is religious faith. Then there's reason. Then there's sensory data. And I'm going to be talking about each one. So first is innate knowledge. Immanuel Kant believed that certain beliefs precede all experience. We know certain things. We're born knowing. Every event has a cause. There is a. You might be familiar with the phenomenon of imprinting, Konrad Lorenz. So Konrad Lorenz, who won the Nobel Prize, showed that hatchling ducklings follow their mother. That's a smart thing for hatchling ducklings to do. But when sneaky biologists took away the mother and had another person when the ducklings hatched, they followed that person, or they followed a doll or a rubber ball. The point is that their innate knowledge was not correct. Okay, now we come to religious knowledge. And the first thing is it's obvious that what we believe as far as religion depends on place of birth. We have more Baptists in Biloxi than Bombay, more Muslims in Malaysia, and so on. If it was simply learning something that was actually true, we shouldn't have differences depending on geography. And I have 3 quotes there. As long as you can read, I'll let you read. I hope none of you are offended, but if you are, I'm sorry. Christopher Hitchens, who I admire tremendously, he wrote about Mother Teresa, and she has been given sainthood, and he describes how she was really a bad person and that suffering of others was fine with her, that she got a lot of money to upgrade her facilities, but she never did. I have the letters ENMU there. I got my bachelor's degree in Eastern New Mexico University, which is in Eastern New Mexico in the Bible Belt. I was from New York. I loved it there, but I was very much out of place in many ways. Anyway, I took a philosophy course. It was taught by the Methodist minister, and I was the devil's advocate. So at one point I told an anecdote. Thomas Huxley had a debate with a theologian, and the theologian had a very great analogy. He said, "You philosophers, you're like a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there." And Huxley, his rejoinder was, "You're right, but you, the theologian, you would have found the cat." Well, I thought that was great. Everyone else in class, 20 or so other students, just stared at me. They didn't get it. Isn't it better to find the cat? But the cat wasn't there. But it was still better to find the cat. And as far as I'm concerned, that's true of religion. A lot of people make huge amounts of money encouraging others to embrace their religion. And there are some examples of sharing God's worth. Of course, it's not really shared. Okay, now we come to reason. So I say a lot more in the book about religion, but I don't want to belabor the point. Agrippa was a philosopher who probably lived sometime after Socrates. And he said that every logical argument has at least one of 3 fallacies. The first one is infinite regress. And what he meant by that is if you want to say some statement is true as a premise for your argument, you have to give evidence for the truth of that statement. And if you give evidence, well, you need evidence for that statement, and so on, and it never ends. Second, there are uncertain assumptions. People called foundationalists say that certain beliefs are obvious, so we can use them as starting points for more complicated arguments. And an example, if X is true, then X is not false. Well, you can see the things that I list there for uncertain assumptions. And even if we accept the foundationalist argument, these arguments aren't going to get us very far. We have so many complex, detailed beliefs that if we start with 2 plus 4, we're not going to get to any of those beliefs. So that doesn't work. The third problem with arguments is circularity. So in many cases, we'll have an argument where A explains B, B explains C, and then C is used to explain A. And that doesn't work. It's invalid. So all arguments, according to Agrippa, have at least one of those fallacies. If reasoning was so simple, if reasoning led to true conclusions, we would expect that good reasoners would convince us. But in fact, philosophers make their reputations largely by rebutting other philosophers. And think about the United States Supreme Court. We have people on the court who are chosen because they're supposed to be brilliant. And yet, almost half of their decisions are not unanimous. So here they are, they listen to brilliant attorneys, and they make their judgments. And for many cases, we know ahead of time how they're going to vote. So reason has nothing to do with it. Okay, next we come to a particular type of reasoning, inductive reasoning, where we learn something at present and then we generalize. We generalize to the future or we generalize to other cases. Well, Bertrand Russell gave the example of a brilliant chicken. And the chicken is fed every day by a farmer, and the chicken, being philosophically inclined, thinks that the farmer will feed it every day. That's what it's done until the chicken is nice and fat. And instead of it being fed, it is given to others to feed on. So Russell says, we may be like the chicken. The sun has risen every day of our lives, but it may not rise tomorrow. Nelson Goodman was a philosopher who made things even more complicated. He said, we think we know what induction is. What I just said, the sun has risen every day so far, so it will rise tomorrow. But in fact, Goodman said, it's much more complicated than that, that any inference can be anything. So let's take an example. Let's suppose that we have observed 1,000 emeralds, and every emerald we've ever observed has been green. So we draw the inductive conclusion that every emerald is green. Well, what Grew says is that that's not the only inductive conclusion that we can draw. Someone might say, I believe that every emerald until March 7th, 2021 shall be green. And after that, every emerald shall be Grew. He invented a word. So Grew means green until March 7th and then blue after March 7th. Now, how can we decide which of those is correct? Well, you say to me, look, everyone we've ever seen has been green. And I say, absolutely, that's just what I believe. But tomorrow it will be blue. And why are you right and me wrong? There's no good logical justification for it. Okay, next is deductive reasoning. With inductive reasoning, people recognize inductive reasoning can be done perfectly and yet still be wrong. With deductive reasoning, we're supposed to always get the correct conclusion as long as we do it right. Well, the only way to prove deduction reliable is to use deductive reasoning. And of course, that's inappropriate. Modern logicians have many principles of reasoning, and they don't all agree. And then Einstein says, reason by itself doesn't tell us anything. We have to start from experience, which I will be getting to. But reason by itself can't teach us anything. Okay, next. People might think that natural selection through millions of years of evolution has nearly perfected our reasoning abilities. So now when we reason, we will almost always reason correctly. In fact, that's incorrect. Stephen Stitch wrote a wonderful paper about this, and he said, natural selection does not necessarily lead to perfect reasoning. For one thing, genes that lead to a certain outcome may be very expensive genetically. It may cost a lot of metabolic machinery. So they may not do a perfect job. It's like if you have a private detective, you hire the private detective and he may get enough evidence for you. You don't need all the evidence. It's just too expensive. Another thing is that natural selection may not have the materials to lead to perfect reasoning. A more interesting one is that many genes have more than one effect. So if a gene makes a person attractive at reproductive age, that gene may be selected even though it leads to more diseases of old age. So that's why all of us are going to die young, because we're so attractive at younger age. Another thing is that natural selection acts on reproductive potential, and that's not the same as having an accurate view of the world. I thought of an example of that. Imagine that there's a long 2-foot wide board that you have to walk across. Well, if the board is on the ground, you would have no trouble at all. It's wide enough. But let's suppose the board is suspended by 2 skyscrapers, between 2 skyscrapers, and you have to walk across. You probably wouldn't make it. It would be terrifying and you'd probably fall. But what if I could hypnotize you and convince you that the board was actually on the ground? Then you'd have no trouble. So not seeing the world in the perfect way may lead to better results. Now I'm going to put you to work. Here's a question.
So we're looking at the question, Jack is looking at Anne, but Anne is looking at George. Jack is married, but George is not. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person?
How many of you are going to bet that you got the correct answer? Jack is married. So is Jack looking at an unmarried person? Jack is looking at Anne, and he's married. George is not married. So Anne, if she's married, she's a married person looking at an unmarried person because she's looking at George. If she's not married, Then Jack is looking at Anne, and again, a married person is looking at an unmarried person. Did you follow that?
Yes.
All right. But it's not easy.
No.
And these are, you know, it shows the limitations of reason, and I'm going to show you more of those. Here's an example. Capital S stands for subjects. So people are given various reasoning problems. Many got them wrong. Most got them wrong. And interestingly, people who were smart, according to various tests they were given, were more likely to make an error. You're probably all familiar with the work of Piaget, where water is poured from one glass into another. Children are asked which beaker holds more water, and they typically say the taller one, even though they were just shown that it's one can be poured right into the other. Well, the interesting thing, Piaget said that's true of very young children, and they outgrow it. But why should we think that we have reached the pinnacle of, and in fact, in one study with adults, adult experienced bartenders poured more alcohol into short, wide glasses than into tall, thin ones. Exactly this, they held exactly the same amount. So we haven't really outgrown the error that children make. There was a study that's become fairly well known now by Philip Tetlock, where he asked people, supposed experts, people who come on television, who write commentaries in newspapers and so on, how likely are certain events to occur within the next 20 years? And the 284 of them made a total of 82,000 forecasts, and they didn't do as well as if they had assigned probabilities randomly. So pundits don't do a great job. We started with Socrates, now we'll go back to Aristotle. And Aristotle said there are three fundamental laws of thought, and they really seem obvious. They're trivial, why even bother? Identity, a thing is identical with itself. Non-contradiction, no statement is both true and false. And excluded middle, every proposition is either true or false. Well, in recent years, philosophers and scientists have rejected all three. I'm not going to get into quantum mechanics today. I'm a layperson, I can't, but I've read a lot of popular quantum mechanics, and they show that certainly the top one is not necessarily the case. So all of these have people who disagree with them. Okay, more work for all of you. Again, I can rest for a bit, and I'd like you to try to decide which of those syllogisms is valid. And again, my point is that even simple reasoning can prove very difficult for very smart people. All right, there are only two valid ones, and they're the last two. And if you look at the last one and you give it serious thought, that's a remarkable thing. That if you trust physics, if physics is true, naive realism, the idea that we have a literally true account of the way the world is, naive realism is false. Again, we think we know what's valid and invalid, but maybe not. What we call validity is really just, we can't think of counterexamples. And the philosopher Quine said that the principles of reasoning come from experience. And I think that this is an interesting quote, that reason is a matter of faith. Why should our thoughts have relation to reality? Again, for reasoning, we need premises. Without premises, without accepting some things as true, as proof, we can't go anywhere. So what I did is I showed all of these arguments are valid, but they start from different places, so they all lead to different conclusions. So just because an argument is valid doesn't mean that the conclusion is correct. I'll pause for a minute. Would anyone like to ask a question to this point?
Fred, we have a question from Judy about the last slide. She asks, something cannot be both true and false. How about the classic example of someone saying that the next statement will be a lie and then saying, I'm lying?
That's a fascinating paradox. It kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. I assume she wasn't really asking a question. She was just giving an interesting bit of information. So now we come to empiricism. This is really the heart of it. Why do we believe? Well, I saw it with my own eyes. Of course I believe it. For one thing, we believe many, many things that we've never observed. I don't know a single person who was around when the Magna Carta was signed. There are twinkly things in the sky at night. I've observed them, but without someone telling me, I wouldn't have thought they were billions of miles away. I never observed a dinosaur, but I believe they exist. And then finally, the claim that all knowledge is gained through the senses is a claim that's not gained through the senses. Okay, Gilbert Ryle and John Austin are two eminent philosophers, and they have an argument that I find really weird. They agree that sensory systems make occasional errors, but they're relatively rare, and we detect them. So because we detect rare errors, that shows that generally our senses are trustworthy. Illusions are infrequently observed, so our perceptions are typically accurate. Well, that's ridiculous if you think about it. Adultery is relatively infrequently observed. That doesn't mean it's infrequent. Maybe we're all having an illusion right now, but we don't know it. Yes, we don't detect many, but that does not mean that many don't exist. I think that's a good example of reasoning going wrong. So why can't we be certain? Well, there are two problems, at least two. One is our memories aren't very good, and the other is any given perception can have an infinite number of possible interpretations, as I will show you shortly. So first, the memory. Elizabeth Loftus and others have done some fascinating work here. And rather than me describe it, let me just introduce it and then you can read. When the Challenger space shuttle exploded in 1986, there was a man teaching a psychology class, and he couldn't pass up the opportunity to do a study. So he asked students to recall exactly where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news that the space shuttle had exploded. And the students all gave their answers. They were all absolutely certain about where they were. And that was the end of it. 2.5 years later, he located most of the students. He was able to because it was a small college. And he asked them again, describe where you were, what you were doing, and so on, and how certain are you? And again, they were absolutely certain, but read the two descriptions from the same person, 2 years apart. About half of the students gave substantially different answers 2.5 years apart. We're back to Piaget. Jean Piaget wrote about when he was about 2 years old. He was in a pram and he had a nanny who was wheeling him along, and a man came and tried to kidnap baby Piaget. And the nanny was very brave and fought him off. And the man scratched her face and they struggled, but she was able to save him. And Piaget, the adult now, wrote that that memory was a very vivid memory for him, and it lasted all through his childhood. When he was about 15, a package came in the mail, and it was from the nanny who had left the Piaget home and had become very religious. And in the package was a gold watch and the letter. And the nanny wrote, I have been feeling guilty all these years because you gave me a gold watch that I didn't deserve. I told you that a man had come to try to kidnap little Jean, but the whole incident never happened. I made it all up. And yet he had this vivid image of it happening. So we can't trust our memories. I guess I left some stuff out when I was making this up. And if you're interested in memory and reliability of memory and so on, you might want to get on the internet and Google Elizabeth Loftus, who has shown us how memories can be manipulated. And she was even able to implant false memories in people so that they would remember things that never happened. Okay, now what I have here is a table. When scientists work, they try to develop relationships between variables. So let's say in this column, we'll call it the X column, when you have one motivational lecture, let's say, you have 2 sales. When you have 2 motivational lectures, you have 3 sales, and so on. What should I put here? Well, you don't really need an equation, but you could have an equation, y equals x plus 1. And then there's an obvious answer. It's 5.0000. Well, the fact is that there are an infinite number of equations that fit. So when x is 1, y is this. When x is 2, y is this. But when x is 4, y is not 5.0000. I'm not a mathematician. I spent a long weekend figuring out equations, and I was able to. There are 2 examples. So these 2 equations, when x, you can do it yourself if you want, copy that equation. When x is 1.0000, y is 2 point, and so on. But when x is 4, there are different values. And then I went even beyond that. Here's another example. Here's a table when x is 1, y is 2. What is y when x is 3? And I arbitrarily, and I have to emphasize this, I arbitrarily picked a number for y here. And I picked -10. In other words, when x is 1, y is 2. When x is 2, y is 3. When x is 4, y is 5. But when x is 3, y is -10. This equation fits. If you don't believe me, try it. And that leads me to the conclusion, for any prediction or explanation about anything, there are an infinite number of conceivable alternatives. And by the way, I have checked with a couple of mathematicians. I checked with a number of people at Cal State where I taught, and the psychologist said that's ridiculous. The biologist said that's ridiculous. The mathematician said, of course, it's obvious. What do you see in that picture? And in fact, people, if they stare long enough, they can see both good and evil. It's easier for me to see good. So if you're having trouble seeing evil, just look at the whites. Mm-hmm. And my point in that is what we see depends on our experience. And if you see good and I see evil, it's not that one of us is right and the other is wrong. We've just had different experiences and we interpret differently. So where do we get knowledge? All kinds of sources, but our sources may be incorrect, may make errors unintentionally, may deliberately deceive. And I'll give different examples. First, motives to deceive. And there are lots of motives. Think of biologists. Roger Sperry did a number of very interesting experiments. In one of them, he removed the eyes of frogs. And when you put the eyes back, the nerve fibers will reconnect and the frogs will be able to see again. So if you put them back the way you took them out, the frogs will eventually develop normal vision. But he also rotated, when he rotated the eyes, the frogs, if he dangled a fly above and to the left of the frog's tongue would shoot down and to the right. And among other things, it shows that perceptions are not infallible. I picked one example to give here, but there are unfortunately hundreds. I suspect you all are aware of many experiments that I think are highly unethical. We could talk about the Tuskegee syphilis experiments and dozens of others. We think about Nazi Germany and the horrible, horrible things they did. But in my view, many of the experiments done by eminent United States physicians and scientists are just as bad. Read about them, you can get my book. So why were they done? They were done to get valuable information. And they did get valuable information, but it meant deceiving and harming many, many people. Okay, next. And this is an interesting one. Nico Tinbergen got the Nobel Prize. He found that when herring gulls laid their eggs, they would invariably take the eggshells and fly away a good distance and drop the eggshells. And he explained, he did various experiments to show that if the eggshells were left where they were laid, they were too visible and predators would come and kill the chicks. So removing them made it less likely that predators would come. So he argued, if an animal always performs a certain behavior under certain circumstances, we should ask, how does it benefit the animal? Well, Richard Dawkins showed it doesn't always benefit the animal. That's a bad question to ask. And he gave an example. There's a certain parasite that has to be eaten by snails, and then the snails have to be eaten by birds for the parasite to go into the next generation of parasites. Well, if the parasite gets into snails, it causes the snail to climb to the top of a plant and wave its I don't know what they're called, stalks or whatever they're called, wave them, which attracts birds, which then are more likely to eat the snails than snails that are hidden in the leaves. The light-seeking behavior of the snails does not benefit the snails. It benefits the parasite. So someone who asked, how does the light-seeking behavior benefit the snail, would be asking the wrong question. More recently, people have talked about the parasite Toxoplasma gondii. Rats get this parasite. And when a rat is infected with the parasite, it loses its fear of cats. In fact, it will go to an area that smells of cats, and it's not going to live very long. But if a cat eats the rat with the parasites then, like with the snail, the parasite can get into the next generation. The cat excretes the parasite, which is then eaten by the rat, and so on. Again, the parasite does not benefit the rat. It benefits the parasite. And there may be many other parasites that we don't know about that affect us. Lying. Again, I'm talking about knowledge that we get from others. Well, we lie a lot. There was an interesting study done years ago where people were randomly assigned to go to one of two groups, and they were asked a bunch of questions about politically sensitive issues, about racism, sexism, and so on. One group was told, just answer the questions. The other group was hooked up to a lie detector, or what was supposed to be a lie detector, and they were told, we have perfected this lie detector, so it's always correct. Well, the two groups gave very different answers to the identical questions. The group that had the supposed infallible lie detector was much more politically correct. I'll let you read that one. Corporations, do they lie? Well, that's a joke. Years ago, ExxonMobil had internal documents talking about climate change and how they were causing a lot of climate change. And at the same time that those internal documents were being written and passed along, ExxonMobil was completely denying it. As far as drugs, it's actually much, much worse than this. Hundreds of thousands of people have died because they were given drugs that they shouldn't have been given. Car manufacturers have lied about emission standards. Johnson & Johnson lied about the risks of talcum powder. I'm not really telling you anything that you don't know, except what I'm saying is that it's much more common than you might realize. I can only give a few examples, but there are dozens and dozens and dozens. So next we come to government. And I like the quote of William Zinsser, under Richard Nixon, launder became a dirty word. I don't really have to say anything about Donald Trump here as far as lying goes. And look up Wikipedia about so many people have lied. Okay, next are the media. Well, Trump complained about fake media, but in fact, there was a problem long before Trump. Think of your local news stations, and they often don't have budgets to talk about what's happening in Iran or anywhere else. Well, PR departments produce press kits. They make up free videos and they send them to TV rooms. So the local TV reporter can insert herself or himself in video release. And really, it's a propaganda piece, but it passes as news. So John Stauber, who wrote an important book, said that half of everything in the TV news originates from a PR firm. That's spooky. And then, of course, there are fake news sites. Look up fake news sites on Wikipedia. There are many examples in history, both commissions and omissions. I like this Tom Paxton song, What Do We Learn in School? Winston Churchill, maybe it was Voltaire, someone wrote, history is written by the victors. And you get very biased accounts. Again, I give many examples in the book. I'm not going to do that here, but histories really depend on who writes them. Okay, next there's frightening fake app. It's a pretty easy thing to get the picture of a celebrity, to have the celebrity say inappropriate things or be in a pornographic film or whatever. Okay, now we come to science. Science is the most sophisticated method for getting information, but we can't really trust it. There are many kinds of problems. There's huge amount of fraud in science. There's inappropriate methodology, as we'll see. Whoops. Now, there are two big kinds of problems. One is chaos theory. So at one point, most scientists, until relatively recently, most scientists believe if two people do a study and they use essentially the same conditions, but not identical, they're in different places, different laboratories, the temperature might be a little different, lighting conditions, and so on, it shouldn't make much difference in outcomes. But chaos theory shows that that's not true. I have many examples, but here's an interesting one. You've probably all heard of the butterfly effect, where a butterfly, whether it flaps its wings or not in South America, leads to a tornado or no tornado somewhere in Asia. Well, here's an example of a seemingly trivial event that has enormous consequences. You may remember the saga of Elian Gonzalez, a young Cuban boy who was on a raft or a small boat to America in 1999. His mother drowned. He was saved. His father wanted him returned to Cuba, but he had relatives in Miami who wanted him to stay there. President Clinton, Vice President Gore sided with the father. And that infuriated the Cuban American community in Florida. In the presidential election that followed, it was between Gore and Bush, and Cuban Americans who typically vote Democratic were so angry with Clinton and Gore that they either stayed home or they voted for Bush. Florida was hotly contested. It was won by 537 votes, even though 50,000 Cuban Americans had probably either not voted or voted for Bush. So Florida decided the election. If Elian Gonzalez had not gotten on that boat, Al Gore would almost surely have become president. The Iraq War would never have happened. So from some trivial event, you get this major, major consequence. There are many examples of that. I thought I'd give just one. Another problem from science is emerging phenomena, where it was thought at one time that if you knew all the parts of a phenomenon, you could predict perfectly. But that's not true. There are many examples. Again, I'll just give one, is comprised of sodium and chlorine. Neither of them look anything like salt. Salt is an emergent phenomenon. Okay, now I think this is a really interesting one. Here are two more syllogisms. I hope you're not sick of them. But here we have a prediction. The prediction is that if we do a certain thing, if we produce certain conditions, then a certain outcome will occur. We arrange for those conditions and the outcome does occur. So the conclusion is that the theory is correct. That's one syllogism. Second syllogism, we predict that under certain conditions an outcome will occur, but we fail to get the predicted outcome, so the theory is incorrect. Well, in fact, the second syllogism is valid, at least if we trust, which if you've been paying attention all along, we shouldn't trust. But if we trust logic, the second syllogism is valid. That is, if a theory makes a prediction and the prediction does not occur, then the theory's wrong. But the first syllogism is incorrect. Why is it important? Well, most of scientific thinking, as well as everyday reasoning, is based on that second syllogism. And let me just show its invalidity. We have a hypothesis, unicorns exist, and they run around at night in Golden Gate Park. And from that, we make a prediction. If we look close enough, we're going to find unicorn droppings, or we're going to find animal droppings in Golden Gate Park. So we do find animal droppings. That certainly does not prove the existence of unicorns. So just because a theory or a hypothesis makes certain predictions and the predictions come about does not mean that the theory is true. But that's how scientists test their theories. Next, we come to probability. You might not have had much problem to this point. I hope you haven't. You know that not anything is absolutely certain. You know that people lie, corporations lie, and so on. You don't have too much trouble accepting what I've said. But now let's go on. You're willing even to really go out on a limb and say, okay, maybe elves exist, maybe mermaids exist. And sure, you might even win the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstake. Most philosophers today who call themselves epistemologists or people who want to study knowledge call themselves fallibists. That is, they agree nothing is certain, but some things are more likely than others. So for example, fallibists will say, and by the way, here's where you and I are about to part company. Fallibists will say, it's more likely that tomorrow someone in Paris will be speaking in the French language than tomorrow you're going to wake up in bed next to a 200-pound bullfrog wearing a tutu. The fallibists and all of you say, clearly that's true. Well, here's where you begin wondering about my sanity. C.I. Lewis argued that the only way to assess probabilities is to have some certainty to rest on. If you don't know something that's absolutely true, then you have no way to estimate the probability that something else is true. So C.I. Lewis argued, you start with premises, and those premises are only probable. And those premises are only probable, and so on. So he says, if certainty is beyond our grasp, so is probability. You might think that's ridiculous, but here are some things just for fun I got on Google and got some numbers. So how likely is it that a close friend of yours is a serial killer or an Al-Qaeda terrorist or is in the witness protection program? Turned out a man I knew and had no idea about it. He was in a witness protection program. Someone of a different gender from what you believe. There have been not studies, but there have been cases of women who have gone to their doctors, health women, gone to their doctors, said, my husband and I have tried for me to have a baby and we haven't been successful. And it turns out that this woman is a genetic male. She didn't know it. CIA spy, polygamist, embezzler. How likely is it that someone you know is one of those things? You'll probably say very low probability. Okay, here are some numbers for you. Kind of depressing. And you can all read those numbers. You're going to start looking more closely at your close friends. Next, this is just going in a different direction. When you look at certain things, I think it's a little crazy. Imagine having a single drop of water from that drop of water, concluding everything that can possibly be known about water. Well, no one would do that, but going from one drop of water to all the water on the earth is a much smaller leap than going from a tiny part of the universe to claims about eternal laws. And let me show you something that I think is remarkable. So here's the Earth, relative sizes. Here's Jupiter, the largest planet, and the Earth is so tiny compared to Jupiter. Here's Earth and Jupiter compared to our sun. I'm not done yet. Don't shake your head, Roberta. Here's our sun compared to Arcturus. And then here is Arcturus compared to Antares. Now, how in the world, from a tiny spot in the earth, can we talk about eternal universal laws? So as I've said, I've read a lot of popular quantum physics. If I'm in another life, I'll become a quantum physicist. I'm sorry I wasn't. But anyway, the leading quantum physicists, Nobel Prize winners, most of them say that there are various views of how the universe is, and in all likelihood, the existence of objective reality is the least likely of any of them. So here are different views, each one held by at least one eminent physicist. For example, Stephen Hawking believed in parallel universes. John Wheeler believed in a participatory universe. That is, our consciousness creates the universe. And there are some fascinating, just incredible experiments that I wish I had time to go into. If any of you are interested, you can email me and I'll send you some references. Or even better, you can get my book. So the conclusion that I draw is that we have an infinite pool of alternatives for anything we believe. So how likely is any particular belief? Not very likely. What are the possibilities? Well, one possibility is I've made some error along the way. I deny that possibility. It could never have happened. But of course, if you see a problem, either today or when you think about it, please email me and I'll leave my email address. Next, radical skepticism is correct, which again, if I took my lie detector test, I would say it is correct and the lie detector would show that I believe it. And then the third possibility, and I think there are only three, is that reasoning is not going to lead us to truth. And then finally, if you're interested in my book, you can go to this website. I hope it will be out in the near future. And aside from that, if you'd like to email me about any of it, I'll put on my email. So I'd be happy to take questions.
Very good. Here's a question, Fred. How does the proliferation of conspiracy theories like QAnon fit into this schema?
Oh, I think it does. I mean, I think the conspiracy theories are crazy, but I actually have a section in the book where there are a lot of conspiracy theories that I flat out don't believe. I'm sure that you don't believe. On the member William Calley and My Lai, the horrible things that American soldiers did to Vietnamese civilians. Well, for years, that was denied as a conspiracy theory. Turned out to be correct. There are conspiracy theories about the Black Panthers that justified the killing of several Black Panthers. There have been many conspiracy theories that have turned out to be true. So I wouldn't call myself, excuse me, a conspiracy theorist, but we should be cautious at least about just writing them off completely. Why do we have privileged information? I sometimes think, who knows, maybe Trump was telling the absolute truth the whole time, and it's the Washington Post and New York Times that lie. So I don't believe that, don't misunderstand me. But I'm saying when there is that proliferation, maybe it's true.
Well, okay. How about the theory that we can actually choose which alternate universe we progress to in a given situation? For example, a person who seems to have a lot of luck may actually be choosing the universe in which they win.
Well, you know, that's the whole issue of free will. And I deal with that a little bit. I haven't read anything specifically about choosing in that way, choosing which universe to live in. What the argument about parallel universes is that every time we make a choice, the universe splits up into two. And I think that that's ridiculous. I put in the book, fools go in where angels fear to tread. And here I'm criticizing Stephen Hawking, and I should be a little humble about that. On the other hand, I did write Henry Stapp, who is an eminent physicist at UC Berkeley, and he agreed with my criticism, so I felt a little better doing it. So I don't know that I answered your question, but I don't think that anyone would say we just choose which universe to go into. I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Joe says, it would seem that those of us who use logic and scientific method must believe in it first. I've known anti-religious persons who find this impossible. And there's a recent math proof that shows chaos theory to not be widely true vis-a-vis the butterfly.
I'm not sure what you mean by widely true. It does occur. There are many examples. There's a really interesting one that I didn't show because it gets into some complex mathematics. But it shows when you're predicting the size of a population, if you start with one number, you get a very predictable result. If you start with a second number, you get a less predictable result. If you start with another number, it looks orderly initially, and then it completely goes bizarre. It's completely unpredictable. So certainly chaos theory does not always work, but it often does. And again, I can give a really interesting reference to that, but I don't have it in front of me right now. I'd have to get it from another room, so I'd rather not do it right now. But again, please email me if you want any of the references. I'll be happy to send them.
Okay.
I should give a little bit more about the one example. It involved mice that were raised in as close to identical conditions as possible. They came from the same litter. They were raised, one in somewhere in Canada, one I think in Berkeley, one in Oregon. I don't remember, 3 different places. They were given identical diets. They were weaned on the same day. They were kept in identical housing. And Robert Sapolsky, in describing the results, said it was like 3 triplet brothers doing pole vaulting in the Olympics. And one brother pole vaults 15 feet, another pole vaults 15 feet 2 inches, and the third vaults 300 feet. Enormous difference. They haven't figured out what the difference is between the three different laboratories because they were as identical as possible and yet vastly different results. So chaos theory still works in many, many cases.
You talked about how people remember events, and this person observes that the memories are often altered to place the person reporting them in a better light. So how can anyone tell who actually has the correct memory?
I don't think we can. I mean, in some cases, if someone asks me about what you said today, I might give an answer, and then there are others who could verify it or deny it. But if you tell me what happened to you as a 2-year-old, I have no way of checking it. So in some cases, I'm saying we can verify it, and others we can't.
All of this gives us so much to think about. And we really appreciate your being here today, Fred.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So much, everyone, for coming.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.